Okay. So we're live. All right. Tonight, we're looking at the 42nd chapter of Genesis. Yeah, we've been in this book for years, years now. But we're going to try to cover, I'm thinking we're going to cover the entire chapter 42 tonight. It's 38 verses, 36 slides. Based on my 2 minutes a slide, that's 72 minutes. But I don't think it's going to take quite that long per slide because this is a straight narrative. It's just here's historical events that happened, what people said, stuff like that. There's no deep doctrinal insight or anything into it. You can still learn things from it. Okay, so given that the rest of the chapters in Genesis, which I've looked at, and we just planning it out, it looks like we can do a chapter every Wednesday when we meet. So based upon that, and taking into account the first Wednesdays of the month, we would finish up Genesis, if it works out that way, on September the 18th. Okay.
That's what year? What year?
2087, I think. If you didn't hear that, she said, what year? Okay, you probably heard it. Anyway, if we do finish up on the 18th, there'll be in one more week before we get to the first Wednesday in October, assuming it works out this way. And talk to the pastor about it. We may be just doing a review, putting all of Genesis back together again, just kind of remind us why we spent so many years in Genesis. There's a reason why we did all this, right? Multiple reasons, but so we may go back and look at that, and then we'll start a new book after that. And right now, it looks like we'll be going into Acts, the New Testament. Genesis is a basic history in the Old Testament. It's the basic history of the world and mankind and of God's redemption of man. Everything starts off in that. And the 5 books of the Pentateuch are the basic history of the Old Testament, the very first books of Moses. Okay, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts are the basic history of the New Testament. Yeah, there's other stuff that comes along after that and all that. We get more detail on it, but that's essentially what it is. So it seemed like a good idea to go ahead and go into Acts. We've been in the Old Testament for a long time. We're going to go to the New Testament for a while. I don't anticipate it being any shorter. So now, if you've got some input on that, let me know. It's not set in stone. It's not in concrete yet. We're interested in what y'all want to do. So let us know. If that sounds good, okay, say so. If not, if not, let me know that too. But tonight we're covering the first trip of Jacob's sons down to Egypt to get food, because they're in the middle of a famine, and a very severe famine. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Yeah. But let's go to the Lord first and ask Him to teach us. So, Lord and Father, we are looking at Your Word, and therefore it's not just anything. It is a historical narrative, and we are looking at the historical events that occurred. Yet there's still things to learn, and You have things to teach us from this, and we believe it and trust You in that. And I ask that You do so, that You open up our minds and our hearts and write Your Word there, that we might not sin against You. For we ask it in Christ's name. Okay. Going on, instead of going through the whole passage, there's 38 verses, pretty long. So instead of going through the whole thing at once, and then going back through it again verse by verse, we're just going to go through it kind of a verse at a time, 1, 2, or 3 verses at a time. Okay, so, but we're going to read the whole thing. Don't worry about it. It's all right. So looking first at verse number 1, it says, now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. And Jacob said to his son, why are you staring at one another? Why are you staring at one another? So Jacob saw, right? Well, not literally, okay? Some people say, well, see, this is a problem because he says he saw it. No, I mean, that's kind of silly, right? Not literally. He didn't have a God's eye view of Egypt from Canaan. He wasn't looking down from the sky or something on it. So someone had told him. That's how he heard about it. So he knew by word of mouth. And even today, we use expressions like that. Use of one sense when literally the expression would state another sense was used. If you're talking on the phone, you'll sometimes say, okay, you hear the plan, you hear what they're talking about. Oh, I see. No, you don't see it. You just heard it. Okay, so that's a typical human expression type thing. We substitute what we say about one sense versus the others. It just means that it came into your knowledge, right? And then he says, why are you staring at one another? Actually, this fits perfectly too. This is something we still do, staring at one another. We stare at each other when we just don't know what to do. Something just happened, you're looking at each other, you can kind of see it. What? What? Just don't know. They're starving. They needed food. Believe me, they wouldn't be going to Egypt for food if if there was any other way to get it. All right? They needed food. So the question in their minds was, at least in the son's minds, is what do we do? What do we do? Then he said, this is verse 2. Who's he? Jacob. Then he said, behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from there so we may live and not die. Well, here Jacob, he's the patriarch of the family. He's the man, the father of all of them. So he provides some direction. This is what we're going to do. He heard that there's grain in Egypt. This time it didn't say see, it says heard. I mean, So seeing is hearing. Hearing is seeing, whatever. So he issues orders to his sons, who are staring at each other in a quandary. Go buy food for us in Egypt. That's where the food is. Go get some so we don't all die. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? We need some food. You get the idea. The famine is very severe in Canaan. In verses 3 and 4, it says, so 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest any harm befall him. So 10 brothers went to Egypt. Benjamin didn't go. Jacob was very protective of Benjamin. I mean, you're going to see that as we continue going through this chapter and in the next several chapters. The last of Rachel's sons, as far as any of them knew, Joseph was already dead. And if you'd have asked any of them, they'd have known that. For a fact, he's already dead. So Benjamin became the favorite after Joseph was removed from the scene. Why? Because he's Rachel's son, and Rachel was the favorite wife, and she died in childbirth with Benjamin. Remember all that? Let's go on to verse 5 then. So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. So this is kind of a description of the train of people that are coming to Egypt to buy grain. The sons of Israel are among those coming to buy that grain. And there are a lot. There's a big stream of people coming down there to buy. I mean, they're essentially feeding the whole area, right? So this is it's a map of the entire area. The purple colored area over on the left, we've seen some of this before, right? I think we've seen this map before, maybe a different scale. Purple colored area is Goshen. Jacob hasn't settled there yet. He's not there. But this is where they came down to, right? The green shaded area up there in the upper right is Canaan. Okay. The lines are the approximate routes the sons and the family took on their trips to Egypt. And the one that we're specifically interested in tonight for chapter 42 is the green line, the top one. Now, they all look like they pretty much parallel each other. They just go along together and along essentially the same route. But we're interested in that green one, the top one, which is labeled as the route the sons took to and from Egypt on the first trip. And that line goes from Hebron down to Beersheba and then over to Ramses. And remember when we talked about Ramses and Avaris, they're in the same location. They're right there together. So if they're not the same city, they may be. To verse 6. Now Joseph was the one in power over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Ooh. Boy, this is kind of coming full circle, isn't it? Isn't it? And when they get there, there's Joseph waiting for them. He's the one they have to buy grain from. The guy they tried to kill, so he wouldn't be their boss. If you remember back there, we're going to go look at that. We'll look at that dream again. But they were not about to bow down to him. Right? So they came before him and bowed down, all together with their faces to the ground. So all that plotting and that murder in their hearts, literal murder in their hearts, doesn't seem to have prevented the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams, does it? No. Let's look at, back in Genesis, chapter 37 and 5 through 8. This is his first dream, Joseph's dream, 5 through 8. Then Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. So they hated him even more. Remember, they didn't like him particularly before that anyway, because he was Jacob's favorite. And he said to them, please listen to this dream which I have had. Indeed, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And behold, my sheaf rose up and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Remember all this? Yeah. And then his brothers said to him, are you really going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. There's a lot of hate building up there, wasn't there? So just a reminder, that's what we're looking at. Just a reminder of the dream, the first one that Joseph had. Now, the symbology, because of what's going on right now and what they're doing, the symbology, the sheaves representing Joseph and the sheaves representing the brothers, and the brothers' sheaves bowing down to Joseph's sheaf, it makes a little more sense, huh? It seems peculiarly apt. The entire reason they are there is to get grain, and that's sheaves. That's how they come, right? And they are literally bowing down. It never entered their minds that they would willingly bow before him. Don't try to second guess God or thwart his plan. It's just not going to work. They became part of it. They were used by God to cause this to come about, come true. Let's look at verse 7. And Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, where have you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan, to buy food. So Joseph recognizes his brothers. Remember when the last time they had seen each other, well, all the time, they are older than he is. They are considerably older than he is. So they looked more like what they did the last time he saw them. But he's dressed as an Egyptian. You know, he's living life as an Egyptian. Essentially, he has an Egyptian wife. He has 2 sons. He's been through. He's a high official of the Pharaoh, right? A matter of fact, the highest official of the Pharaoh. Okay. When they last saw him, he was 17. But, besides being sure he was dead, they weren't looking for him. So remember, when he interpreted the first dream, when God interpreted the first dream through Joseph, he was 30 years old. And the scripture tells us that. He was 30 years old. And they've been through 7 years of plenty. And they've been through a few years, don't know how many, but some time of famine, because they've had enough time to run out of food and have to go back and get it, have to come down to Egypt to try to find food. And remember what Jacob had as far as flocks and herd, thousands upon thousands of sheep and goats and donkeys and all kind of stuff, right? So if they need food, it's been a while. Been a while. So he's at least 37 plus years old, and I'm figuring more like 40. The last time they saw him, he was 17. You change any from 17 to 40? Amber says no. Well, y'all don't either, of course. Yes. So he's speaking harshly to him. That's what he says. All right, Miss Judy, we know you didn't change at all. Yeah. He speaks harshly. Pure deception, is that speaking harshly to is pure deception? Well, maybe. Maybe he's just trying to do that. But remember this, he has reason to be suspicious and hard on them. The last thing he knows about them, the last thing that they did as far as he knows, they tried to kill him. They had every intent to kill him. So what are they coming down here to Egypt for? Well, food, but is that just a cover story? Verse 8. But Joseph recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. We've already been through that. He recognized them. They didn't recognize him. So it's a one-way recognition. One way. They don't know what's going on. And he kind of takes advantages of that. Verse 9, continuing on. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to look at the nakedness of the land." So he's recalled their reactions to his dream. They tried to kill him. About that. And the big point is they were willing to kill him to keep from being under his authority. That's a big deal. I mean, that's a lot of hate. And he says, you are spies. You come to spy out the land. And we're going to talk about what that specific phrase means here, that nakedness of the land. We'll talk about that when we get to verse 12. But let's look at the second dream now, because here's the second dream. We're in Genesis 37, verse 9. And it says, Then he had still another dream, and recounted it to his brothers, and said, Behold, I have had still another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Anyway, this got him really spun up. Because not only the brothers, not only are you guys going to be bowing down to me, but so is Jacob and his wives. Right? Everybody's going to be bowing down to him. That seems to be what sent them over the edge. They didn't act until after that dream had occurred, and he told them about it. And it angered Jacob too, if you remember. He wasn't real happy with it, although not to the extent that the sons were. Not to that extent at all. Matter of fact, it says that he considered the words. Remember at the end, he said, yeah, he got angry, but he considered the words that he had heard. Continuing on in verse 10 and 11. Then they said to him, No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. He called themselves your servants. So, it's interesting here. They tell the truth. They are. They're telling the truth. We've come to buy food, and we're not spies. We've just come to buy food. And they expand on that more than just to give a little more complete and a hopefully believable story. You do that. I mean, you tell out a little bit more truth if you want somebody to believe it. We're honest men, sons of one man. We are not spies. Are they telling the truth? Yeah. Yeah, they are. 12. And he, who's he? Joseph. And he said to them, No, but you have come to look at the nakedness of our land. He's back to that same phrase again, back to the nakedness of our land. He reiterates that accusation of being spies, accusation. Come to look at the nakedness of the land. That word, nakedness of the land, in both verses 9 and 12, translated nakedness is erwa, and means nakedness, but especially of the genital area. the area of greatest vulnerability. So you've come to spy out or uncover our vulnerabilities. He's talking about the nakedness of that's what he's talking about. You want to see where we're vulnerable, where you can attack, what you can take, stuff like that. Usually in preparation for an invasion. That's what you send spies out ahead for. That's what the Israelites did when they came into the land of Canaan. They sent out spies ahead, right? They came back and scared them so much that they went back into the wilderness for 40 years. Well, God sent them back into the wilderness for 40 years. They just weren't willing to trust him. And he had told them. Anyway, maybe Jacob and his family intended to destroy, conquer, or pillage. So that's what he's accusing him of. And at this point, you kind of get the idea Joseph doesn't know what to believe with this. Now, before you say that's ridiculous, remember Shechem. Remember Shechem. A city destroyed and pillaged. All the men killed. The women and children taken into slavery or killed. And Joseph knew their history. And it's been 20 plus years. A lot of things could change for better or for worse during that time period. So Joseph doesn't really know. At least it doesn't seem that he does. Doesn't tell us straight out that he didn't know, but it all makes sense if we just keep in mind what Joseph would have known at the time and the way he would be looking at it. Now remember, he's been living for 20 plus, 23, 24 maybe years as an Egyptian official. He's had the good of the kingdom, Egypt, in his mind that whole time, collecting the food, distributing the food, doing all this stuff. So he has reason to be protective of that kingdom. Verse 13. So they said, your servants are 12 brothers in all. Excuse me. The sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. They're still telling the truth. So they expand on their history to this servant of Pharaoh. 12 brothers in all. 12. Sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest stayed home, and one's already dead. That is, he is no more. Right? Hoping to get him to believe them. Wow. Of course, they're talking to the one who's dead, I think. Verse 14 and 15. And Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you. You are spies. By this you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Wow. Just as I said, you're spies. He doesn't believe them. At least he purports not to believe them. And the test to prove their truthfulness is going to be to bring the youngest brother there. I imagine he wants to see Benjamin. Benjamin didn't take part of trying to kill Joseph. But you know what? The brothers know that Jacob's not going to like this. And he's not. So, verse 16. Send one of you that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, but if not, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. He's saying, you send one of you to go get him, Benjamin, the youngest one. He doesn't know the name yet, supposedly, but he does. While the rest of you are in prison. Right? If he isn't brought here, we know you're spies. You know what happens to spies? Yeah, that's exactly right. They get executed. That's the standard. And that's what the threat is here. He keeps calling them spies and says, if you don't do this, then surely you're spies. There wasn't any doubt in any of their minds. I think that that means you get shortened. Right? Verse 17 and 18. Then he, that's Joseph, put them all together in prison for 3 days. And Joseph said to them on the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. So he threw them in prison for 3 days. Now, think about it. He's given his requirements already, but he threw them in prison, let them think about it. So after 3 days, he's changing his requirements. He puts some modified requirements to them because, it says why? Because he fears God. That word God is Elohim. Elohim. That's the normal word for God. The God, one and only. Elohim. In verse 19, if you are honest men, here's his new requirements. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers keep confined in your prison. But as for the rest of you, go, bring grain for the famine of your households. So this new requirement is let one stay in prison to be the hostage. Let the rest can take grain to their homes for the famine. So he's relenting in some ways. And actually, this is still his family. It looks like he wants to be sure that they get fed. So not 9 stay, but only 1. That gets grain to their family and retains a hostage. A hostage. And he continues on talking, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be proven true, and you will not die. That's that business again. You won't die if your words are proven true, because then we'll decide that you're not spies. But if you are spies, you're going to die. You're going to die. So the rest of that requirement still remains. Bring the youngest boy, so you will not die. That's the death threat. And they did so. Looking a little bit ahead. Okay. This are 3 verse blocks, so I didn't highlight anything. So this is all 3 of them. Verses 21, 22, and 23. Then they said to one another, because this is them in the prison, the brothers. Then they said to one another, surely we are guilty concerning our brothers, because we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not tell you, saying, do not sin against the boy, yet you would not listen. So also his blood, behold, it is required of us. Now, verse 23, now they did not know that Joseph was listening, but there was an interpreter between them. So they don't leave right away, but they back to their cell. They're back in the prison. They talk among themselves, revealing that they all felt guilt for what they had done. It comes out that Joseph didn't know this yet, that Reuben tried to dissuade them. Excuse me. So far as Joseph knows now, Reuben is the least guilty among them. The reason that's significant is that the eldest is normally the most valuable and would be the higher value hostage. And that's typically who you take hostage, right? So Reuben's the natural choice as the one to keep. It's just the natural, right? It doesn't say that he was thinking about it, but they don't even know that Joseph can speak their language. There's always been an interpreter there for them. They've been speaking through an interpreter. He's been speaking Egyptian. They've been speaking Hebrew. And he overhears them in all that they say. So some things are coming to Joseph for the first time. Things he didn't know before. Okay. Let's go to, since this time, Genesis 37. If we're going to come back a few chapters, but in Genesis 37, verses 28 through 29, then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He was upset because he was going to take Joseph out and take him back to Jacob, right? Didn't get to do that because he was gone. Because he was gone. Verse 24, back in our text, verse 24, and he turned away from them and wept. Then he returned to them and spoke to them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. So it all gets to Joseph. His emotions must be in turmoil about this time. He's hearing what his brothers are thinking. during this time. He's emotionally moved by what he's heard. So as the single prisoner, he takes Simeon, not Reuben, and binds him right in front of them. You remember who Simeon is? Simeon of the Simeon-Levi city of Shechem incident. Between Simeon and Levi, they were the ringleaders of the let's go destroy Shechem because of Dinah. Right? A little justice in there for Simeon, although very little. It's not really not much. Verse 25. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their bags with grain and to restore every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey, and thus it was done for them. So they get their grain. This keeps the family fed, or will keep the family fed. And he restores to each man his money. Well, that's out of the script, but he's given them the money back. And not only are the sacks filled with grain, Joseph also provides them with food for the journey home, besides the sacks of grain that they're carrying. Okay. And going on to verse 26. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and went from there. So they brought donkeys to carry everything, loaded them up and departed for home. They're not just carrying a small sack of grain. Each man has a significant amount of food on his donkey. It may be several donkeys. I don't know. But they're having to carry enough food back to last the family for what, another year or who knows how long. But anyway, you don't want to have to make a trip down to Egypt once a week. That's a long way to go to the grocery store. All right. So verse 27. Then one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, and he saw his money. And behold, it was in the mouth of his sack. So one of them opens up a sack for his donkey. I guess it's going to feed the donkey, right? It says fodder for the donkey. And when they're at a lodging place, that's just somewhere along the route where they decided to either camp or ask somebody for hospitality and stay there while they were there. Anyway, they got to that point, and he decides to get some food out for his donkey and finds his money in the sack. Can you imagine the questions that are running through their head? What in the world? The money's back in the sack. We didn't put it there. We didn't steal the money. How did this money get there? So he said to his brothers, this is the same one. We don't really know which brother that's just talking about. It doesn't tell us. So he said to his brothers, my money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack. And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? So he, the brother that found the money, tells them all the money's been returned in their favor. They know who controls all events. And they ask, what has God done to us? Yes, he is in control. And yes, he has done this. Maybe this is part of the price for their treachery with Joseph, because they don't see good coming out of this. We'll talk about that a little bit more. As with so many things in life, they do not know what God is doing. We don't know what God is doing. The lesson is, whatever he's doing, trust him. Trust him. Yeah, that's the whole message of the book of Job. That's the message here. Trust him. He is trustworthy. He's a lot more than just trustworthy, but he is trustworthy. Now we're going on and looking at 29 and 30. Then they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke harshly with us and took us for spies of the country. So Jacob is informed of all that happened to them while they're down there. They fear Joseph, although they don't know who he actually is yet. None of them do. They know he's the powerful man in Egypt they must deal with, but he took them for spies. Remember, death penalty. So that's all they know about him. This is a powerful man down there who thinks they're spies, and they're having to prove to him that they're not. And now they've got this money in their sacks, and what do we do now? That's going to look. So going on to verses 31 and 32. So We said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father today in the land of Canaan. Okay, a little repetition. We've heard this before, but he's telling Jacob. So here's what they said. They had explained who they were, and that there was another brother. Remember, they keep expanding on the truth a little bit more to try to make a more complete, coherent story for them. The youngest is still in Canaan with their father. And then 33 and 34, then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I will know that you are the honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me and take grain for the famine of your households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, that I may know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will give your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. All sounds good. So they tell Jacob the requirements of this powerful Egyptian official. Leave one brother as hostage, and that turned out to be Simeon. Take the grain, bring your youngest brother to show you're honest men. And he promised to return Simeon and allow them to go on trade and make, get more food in Egypt, whatever else they wanted. They can trade in Egypt after that. So Jacob is getting all this story. And in verse 35, it says, now it happened that they were emptying their sacks. Remember, they've only found money in one guy's sack so far. Right? But when they were emptying their sacks, and behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. Every one of them. Not just one. And they and their father saw their bundles of money, and they feared. So Jacob and the sons, they see the bundles of money, and they're all afraid. There's money in Egypt, and they feared. No idea what this meant. What does it mean to find all their money back in their sacks? Right? But it seems to portend that they cannot return to Egypt to trade. Returning with Benjamin was supposed to prove they were honest men. But they came back to Jacob, they came back to Hebron with the money they used to buy grain in Egypt. That doesn't sound like honest men, does it? It doesn't. But maybe thieves and spies. So they feared. They feared, especially remember, there's still somebody down there. 36. And their father Jacob said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me. Bereaved me of my children. The word is shakul. That's all one thing. That whole phrase, shakul. Same word as barren. You talk about a woman not having children or whatever, barren, right? Shakul. Means to bereave, to become childless, to deprived of children or sons, cause or sustain an abortion, proven barren, fruitless. That's what that word means, and that's what he's talking about. So Joseph is dead, Simeon's in prison in Egypt, and now they want to take Benjamin down there, and he's got no expectation other than that they'll keep him too and all the rest of them. They go back. Because they came back with the money too, on top of all that. There's a little self-pity here. All these things are against me. It sounds like he's wailing. Maybe a little understandable, but he's upset. Joseph and Benjamin, Joseph was, Benjamin is, his favorites. Because they were the sons of Rachel. Let's look at Genesis 43:6. This is looking ahead a little bit into the future, because this is out of chapter 43. We're in chapter 42, right? This is just to show kind of the way Jacob's feeling, okay? It says, then Israel said, why did you treat me so badly by telling the man whether you still had another brother? Why did you tell him that? Once you get into a situation like that, it doesn't do any good to wail about, though, what somebody did. Why didn't you do something different? Well, they didn't do something different. They did what they did, right? And we understand why they did what they did. They were telling the truth and trying to get the powerful guy in Egypt to believe them, the guy they were bowing in front of. So Here's Israel. He says he was treated badly. He doesn't want to lose Benjamin too, Rachel's last child. Kind of whining a little bit. Why did you tell him that? Verse 37. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, you may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you, but put him in my hand, and I will return him to you. Well, here's old Reuben again. He's sometimes Reuben's a little hard to figure out. So Reuben's offer to try to persuade Jacob to let them take Benjamin, his sons. He offers up his sons. You can put them to death if I don't bring Benjamin back. What an offer! What kind of offer is that? Is that persuasive? You can kill your 2 grandsons if I don't come back. I don't bring him back, because that's what they are. They're his sons, but they're Jacob's grandsons. Would you want to, if one of your sons, something happened to one of your sons, would you want to kill your grandsons? I don't think Jacob did either. So MacArthur had some comments to make about this passage too. So it kind of falls in the same category too. You can't help but think that Reuben knew that wasn't going to happen. It's kind of a false offer. Okay. So was there anything genuine about it? I don't know. It's our final verse, 38. But Jacob said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone remains. If harm should befall him on the journey on which you are going, then you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. Jacob just flat out refuses. No, he's not going, and he doesn't relent, at least not in this chapter. Right? No, Benjamin isn't going. It would kill me if he's harmed going to Egypt. Sheol. You know what Sheol is? I'll take my head down. Sheol is the grave. Right? That's the word. And it sounds again like he's whining, but we can kind of understand where he's coming from. This is our final map. It kind of puts everything, it's showing several journeys on it, right? The green line on this map, this is just kind of keeping it in perspective, what the area that we're talking about. It's not that far apart. You can see the scale of miles down there in the lower right. That bar down there, the top one's about 40 miles. So it's maybe, what, a quarter to a third of the way across Texas, maybe, to get there. So the green is Joseph to Egypt from Dothan. The purple solid is Jacob returning from Haran to Hebron. The purple dotted is Jacob's sons going from Hebron up to Shechem and Dothan, and that's also the route Joseph took to go check on them and report back to Jacob. And that's where we are. We'll pick up next week in chapter 43. And yeah, you already know that they're going back. So some things change. Somebody relents or whatever, and we know how it comes out. So it's still interesting to go through it and see what they're thinking as these things are revealed to them, because little by little they gain more of the story, and their opinions and their outlook solidifies and changes. That's as it should be. So remember, keep in mind what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. Let me know what you think. Let's go to the Lord. Our Lord and our Father, we do thank you for this night and each other, and being able to look into your word, read it, and study it a little bit, see what it is that Joseph and Jacob and the brothers, but this family that became a nation peculiar to you. Not that they were perfect or the best country around or the best nation around. No, they were human beings with all the weaknesses and foibles of human beings, just like us. But we thank you for being with us and showing us what it is that you'd have us to get out of this passage. And we thank you in Christ's name.